Welcome to the SaaS Revolution Show, a podcast by SaaStock. Here we interview SaaS founders from around the world who've been there and done that, as they share the ins and outs of how they built their businesses, their operations, their path to securing investment, and more. Our mission with the podcast is to help you, the founder, learn how to scale your SaaS, maintain your well-being, and navigate the complexities of this ever-changing industry. I'm your host, Alex Theuma, and together we'll explore the good, the bad, and the ugly in the journey to SaaS success.
Welcome back to the SaaS Revolution Show. I'm your host, Alex Theuma, CEO and founder of SaaStock, and delighted to be joined with a repeat guest here. Lovely to see you, Angeley Mullins, who is the Chief Commercial Officer of Resourcify. Welcome back.
Thanks, Alex. Nice to be here.
Yeah, good to have you back. This is ahead. We're recording this 3 weeks ahead of SaaStock Europe, which is returning, and you're also returning. And so excited for that. Looking forward to being back in Dublin or at SaaStock, or both?
Both. I mean, SaaStock, absolutely. Dublin, of course. I think it's really a great match. So really excited to be back. Excited to hear all the speakers, really great community, and a lot of great thought leaders.
Yeah, so as we're sort of like 3 weeks out from the events, not only am I, the stress levels are elevating a little bit, but after 9 years, I'm getting a lot more used to, how to manage those. I'm also quite anticipatory and very excited to get everybody back together again. And there's also like I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a very high percentage of let's say net new speakers this year, which is very cool, including some that we've been chasing for years and years, who have finally bowed to the, not the pressure, but finally said yes. So excited for that. And so, Angeli, for those that perhaps didn't catch your episode that we published about 12 months ago, tell us a little bit about yourself, your career, and maybe how that's led to you being Chief Commercial Officer of Resourcify.
Yeah, sure. So for all the listeners, I'm Angeli. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Resourcify. So I lead all the commercial functions and go to market. Those who can hear my accent, I live in Berlin, but I'm not from Germany. I'm actually from sunny San Diego, which coming towards winter I will probably be missing, with a nice climate. I have about 20 years of go-to-market experience. I specialize in digital growth and digital revenue growth. So for those companies that have PLG, product-led growth, and also have digital motions, these are the things that I specialize in. I have a broad background of large companies, so come from your Amazon, your Intuit QuickBooks, your GoDaddy, and then made the transition into scale-ups. So have done everything from seed, Series A, Series B, Series C, and scaling, and have seen quite a variety of things and across different continents. So quite a vast experience. And I have a very special love and passion for branding and branding as a revenue driver.
And what brought you to Europe? I imagine it perhaps maybe work related. And I guess, do you miss San Diego? And how does Berlin compare? Maybe from a tech perspective.
It's quite interesting. So San Diego is actually a biotech, medtech, life sciences cities. So for any of those listeners that happen to be in medtech or biotech, San Diego is absolutely the place to be. They have very famous university programs there, and a lot of like your Medtronics, like these types of companies happen to be located there. But for your, I would say, standard services, software SaaS, not so much. You have to kind of go north in California, more to San Francisco area to get that. And then as far as that, how that relates to Berlin, as far as Europe is concerned, I know that there's this, I would say, friendly rivalry between Berlin and Paris as far as competing to be the number one tech hub as far as companies, talent, and, VCPE, money rolling in. But as a Berliner, I, of course, am vouching for Berlin. It's a fantastic ecosystem here. It started out as kind of, your rocket internet, and it started out with more of the performance marketing and e-commerce. And now you're really starting to see B2B SaaS starting to take over as well. So for those of you who are considering where to live, I would definitely say Berlin is, a prime contender, and the ecosystem here just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
I think, like I mentioned before we were recording, I was just in Berlin, and I think, as we said, they're having Indian summer. So in the sunshine, it was glorious. And I found myself, I managed to have an opportunity to walk around the park. The vibe and the spirit was amazing there. And, I daydreamed for a moment there, thinking about, could I live in Berlin? And it's definitely an interesting one. I did think about, the winters maybe like a little bit off-putting for myself potentially. How do you cope with that, or are they off-putting at all?
It really depends on your point of view. So, Berlin has a lot of culture, a lot of art, and creativity here. The darkness during the winter, yes, it can be a downer, but what I would say is people find really cool things to do. There's lots of museums. Of course, Berlin's known for being, a city of raves and the music scene. So there's a lot to appreciate even during the winter. And the more expats and internationals that come to Berlin, I would say the bigger and better kind of the cultural diversity scene gets. You also have some of the best Christmas markets here. I know a lot of people would probably, challenge me with their own, cities and their Christmas markets, but the ones here in Berlin are quite fantastic.
So I know we're going to speak about brand because this is something that you're extremely passionate about and have a wealth of experience on. One of the questions that comes to mind that I want to kick off around is maybe from your experience and what you've seen about how US companies and maybe US founders compared to Europeans look at brand and their effectiveness around that. Because my assumption, maybe just from what I see and, let's say just from LinkedIn, it does feel like the Americans do it better than the Europeans, right? But is that a fair statement? And I guess from your experience, how do you view that?
Sure, it's a great question, Alex. And of course, you're talking to an American, so I have my biased opinion. But, I really think the difference between, the US founders and companies and the European ones has to do with the storytelling, which goes hand in hand with brand. Americans are natural storytellers. It's part of the culture. It's part of how they do business. And they really grasp the identity and the value that brand brings with that storytelling versus what I've noticed in scale-ups, especially in Europe. It's more of a product first and especially process first. And they really believe that process drives outcomes, where in the American way, they believe that outcomes drive outcomes. So it's just a different methodology. It's something, though, that I have to say the European founders and scale-ups are starting to understand a bit better. And what they're finding is that process doesn't always dictate outcomes, or what they're finding is that just having a good product alone doesn't necessarily sell itself. So the analogy I always give to founders is, think of the Apple, iPhone. They will pitch something new that nobody even knows what the new features are, and people are standing outside waiting, to get it. And then they see, okay, how many do we need to build? Versus in Europe, they'll, just perfect a product, to nearly 100% before they even try to figure out if somebody wants to buy it. So it's really just a difference of storytelling. And to me, that's the essence of brand.
Like you see, or maybe you don't, a lot of companies that are very successful, right, maybe billion-dollar companies, where let's say their CEO, their founders are almost not visible, right? They're probably like heads down, cranking. They're not posting on LinkedIn every day or ever, all right? And then you also see the opposite, right? And you see like a lot of founders, again, let's just use the channel of LinkedIn, but it's also on X and other channels and mediums, podcasts even, where they are really doing this storytelling. They're, posting maybe 3 to 5 times a week or maybe even constantly on X, right? And just tweeting however many times a day and getting involved in conversations. So I guess with that, perhaps maybe I don't know if there is a right or wrong way. But what is your perspective around that as to maybe why some companies like choose to go all in and, others don't do it, but both maybe see, success from that?
Alex, I think what you're really speaking to is the difference between a founder-led brand and more of a company product, led brand. And these are two different roads that can lead to similar paths. It again goes back to the story that you want to tell. So if you have a product or a service that is more consumer driven, or you can relate to it a little bit more in the consumer, or if you take the example of Tinder, the dating app as an example, where very famous female founder who was basically booted out of the other app and then started her own, and so you can really see that founder led type of growth in that story that people can connect to. So there's two different ways to do it. And it really has to go more towards what's the personal story of the founder. Have they had to overcome certain, adversities? And I don't just mean the standard ones of trying to go for investment, because that's more universal, but, some really outlined stories that people can connect to. Or is it more about the product and the service? And the product and the service itself has a story attached to it that people can really connect to. So I think that's why you see the split between the different pathways in storytelling.
I assume, can you do both? Can a company do the founder-led stuff and also do the product-led, branding, and also then that, potentially being a great outcome?
They can do both. I would say at the beginning stages of scaling, usually seed to Series B, it's usually the founder telling her or his story, and then the product and company vision taking off from there. Usually you see, the big behemoth companies, like take your Amazons and your Microsofts and all of this, you usually have, the company, the market taking over. And then usually you see in X, app, you see, the different original founders, they have their X accounts and they're, talking about whatever they want to. But again, you can be successful at both. I'm not sure at the same time. And it depends on the story you want to tell. So let's say a company that's past Series B, the company, product, service, that story is taking off, then maybe the founder does something a little bit different. I've seen this in Travel Perk, for example. So Avi, the CEO there, he has a lot of posts about more kind of social, type of topics as the, company has their own brand identity. So there is a different way to do it, but you really do need to have a plan.
And so if we look at that then, so would you make a recommendation or a strong recommendation for any pre-Series B, earlier stage companies that they try, if they're not already doing a founder-led approach, and if so, why?
So what I recommend for any pre-Series B company is either the founder or somebody within the leadership team needs to be the spearhead to tell the story. And one of the things that I found is not all founders are very comfortable with storytelling or telling their own stories. So if it's not the founder, and if you're a founder listening to this episode, nominate somebody in your leadership team that is good at storytelling, knows how to tell the story and how to connect. Somebody in the leadership team needs to be the point woman or man in this case, and really make sure that you connect with people, because not only your consumers, but talent that you're looking to attract, they're all looking at this story. They want to be able to connect with the company, the values, the adversity you had to overcome, the vision, the mission, what you're doing. And this is something that a lot of founders and leadership teams pre-Series B are forgetting, because they're just so deadly focused, right, on getting revenue growth and making sure they have product market fit, that sometimes they forget that this storytelling can sometimes make or break their future trajectory. Like
you mentioned there, I think certainly, and I've spoken to quite a few founders, I think over the years, and again, like, I don't really have the data set here, but I'm sort of leaning towards maybe predominantly Europeans feel a little bit uncomfortable, let's say, the founder, CEO, right, in doing this, and also then feel maybe it's like, not, I don't know, a chore, but I've got to do this LinkedIn post, or like the team is, or I understand I need to be doing this founder-led storytelling, but they don't, again, like necessarily enjoy or kind of want to do it, and they feel maybe like sucked into doing other things. So in terms of like overcoming that, is it, one way, like, would you recommend that they work with somebody on their marketing team, that maybe content is created either for them or in collaboration with them to kind of get through that, and perhaps how also do you get that authenticity sort of through as well? Because I also know a number of examples where let's say founders or CEOs are trying this, but effectively a third party is creating their content and maybe it just comes across less authentic?
It's a great question. And this is one of the things when you talk about authenticity and brand and storytelling, these things really go together hand in hand. So if you're a founder listening and storytelling is not your thing and you don't feel comfortable doing it, and you don't, most importantly, if you don't want to do it, then I would make sure that you nominate somebody else in your leadership team to be the public spokesperson. Because when you get onto news, media broadcasts, when you're interviewing with reporters, when you're sitting down, in panel speeches, or you're getting up there on stage, if you don't want to do it and it's not your passion, that comes across. And it's not going to help the brand. It's not going to help your company's story. It's not going to help people get enthused. So I would just, if you're a founder listening to this, just take a real deep think about, is this what I want to do? Is this my strength? And I know that as founders get advice from their board members, from, their other colleagues in their community, they're being told to do 50 different things at once. You have to index on the things that you're passionate about and the things that you're good at. You can't do every single thing. So this is where I would say, yes, you could have somebody internally creating the content for you. Yes, you can go to an agency. They can put together a complete plan for you. But if you can't materialize that in an authentic way and you can't communicate in an authentic way, then it's not going to land. So I would just say either yourself or somebody else to do it.
What if nobody on your leadership team wanted to do it? Have you got the wrong leadership team there?
I would
if you didn't want to do it and the leadership team didn't want to do it.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if you have the wrong leadership team. I would just say maybe you need to look at the composite. It's more about you thinking about what's important at what stage of the growth cycle. And this is one of the things I think we talked about, Alex, when we had our podcast last year, before last year's SaaStock, is companies usually think about demand generation almost when it's too late, and then they go towards more traditional methods of bringing clients in, and they forget about the brand, they forget about the storytelling. So a lot of times what happens is founders, they don't even think about this. And then they look at their leadership team, and like you're saying, okay, is it the wrong leadership team? I would say it's the wrong selection process. They weren't thinking about it, where they could have, gotten a really great talent on their leadership team that does have that authenticity, that can do the storytelling. So selection is everything, but founders won't know how to select if they are not aware that this is needed at the beginning.
And what are your thoughts, like maybe the last question around sort of like founder specific branding and storytelling. But again, I've seen examples where, let's say the David goes up against the Goliath, and they're quite provocative, really calling out the competition and kind of like almost going into battle with the competition, right? One example, which I think is fine to say, like I've seen Adam Robinson with his new, obviously he's been crushing it on LinkedIn. Certainly, I would say crushing it from the perspective of getting hundreds of thousands of impressions, right? Again, whether that is the important thing, but it's elevated his brand to be somebody that people recognize. And he's gone up against 6 Sense and was, slagging off the product, but he was sort of quite provocative against that, and perhaps received some legal notices and stuff like that. What are your thoughts around doing that? Because I know there are examples, one just given there, but and also maybe in the past where they're well known and this has happened. But in general, yeah, what are your thoughts around doing that? Because I would say mostly from, and whether this is a European perspective or not, people generally tend to advise against doing that, and even mentioning your competition, right?
It's another great question. I mean, you kind of go back to the typical Steve Jobs and the, Bezos method of focusing on yourself and focusing on your own business. You should be so focused on your own business and your own mission and vision that the competitors aren't even there. It's not to say, obviously you do your competitive analysis, you need to know your go-to-market plan, but you should be forging the next era, right? The next level. So if you're constantly trying to outcompete your competitors on a feature or price or, whatever it might be, then it's just a race to the bottom. And these things don't last very long. So I think, your question is more about short-term clickbait versus long-term strategic initiative and long-term customer loyalty. And that loyalty lies in the authenticity. So when you really talk about, as a company or as a founder, your own struggles, your product market fit, what you're really looking to solve, think about all the founders that we know and we recognize. The majority of them are talking about their own struggles, the challenges they're trying to solve, what benefit they have for the client, their own stories. They're not sitting there talking about, my company versus company B, C, and D. You can do that for a short-term piece. You can do that for maybe a short-term clickbait, but I don't recommend it as a long-term strategy.
Let's switch from founder to company then, right? And let's maybe kind of break this into early stage and more kind of growth stage as well. So we know we've just spoken about how founder-led sort of like storytelling and branding is very important, like at early stage. But what else, like at early stage, can companies be doing to look at, building a strong brand, or, what are the table stakes?
It's really interesting. At my current company at Resourcify, we recently did a rebrand earlier this year, and we do digital waste management, which is not very sexy. And we're thinking about, okay, how do we take something like waste and make it sexy and make it relatable to people? And it's something that we use every day. So we actually started with this "what do we believe" statement. And a lot of companies, especially, pre-Series B, they don't actually have a statement on what we believe. I'm a big fan of Tony Robbins, so I know that might date me a little bit, but if you go back into YouTube and you look at the old Tony Robbins videos, he always talks about people don't buy what you sell, people believe what you believe. So if you don't tell people what you believe, there's no way that they're going to follow you. So I think the best and most easy thing that you can do as a founder starting out, especially at the beginning stages of your growth, is to really just take a piece of paper, sit in a quiet room, and write down what is it that you believe and what is it that the company believes. And then the more you solidify that, that will help you have the foundation of your go-to-market strategy, your growth plan, your storytelling, and then your brand building. And so your brand building is something, I think that we've talked about this before in the different podcasts. And if you want to hear more, SaaStock this year, October, but it is really the foundation of a company's revenue growth. And it's something that many founders, early stage founders, just forget. And they flat out forget it. And it really is to the peril of their revenue.
And then let's say that you're an early stage founder, early stage company, and you've written this down, you've nailed it, you've been working on this, and maybe you've been doing, with that, the founder-led storytelling as well. Then you get to Series B, sort of plus. How do you take this to the next level? Like, where do you think about brand as, like, maybe you're at 10 million ARR and you want to get to 100?
It's always the 10 million to the 100.
It's a long journey.
Right? It's a long journey, but it's always the big one. And it's certainly the one, that brings in the investment. What I would say is to create a movement. So kind of look at what Notion did. I wouldn't say that they're marketing. So, apologies to anyone in the marketing team there, but I wouldn't say that the marketing was, blowing anyone away. But I would say what they did do that was fantastic was they created this mini movement. And everyone, it's almost like, have a Notion page for it. It reminds me of back in the days of Google when first coming out and you were trying to get driving directions or you're trying to go into search. People started using it as a verb. Just Google it. And they created that movement. And so I think that's what really differentiated them. So you look at a company like Notion, that's what they did. Certainly they have more advanced marketing at this stage, but I'll just say at the beginning, it wasn't something that I think anyone was particularly picking up on. I didn't see it anywhere. People weren't really talking about it. They created the internal movement. So it really just depends on how you want to do it. But after Series B, I think that's really the bigger differentiator. Try to create the movement internally for whatever your product market fit is, whatever your service is, and that can really take you a long way. Otherwise, you're going to go in the traditional, routes of all of your marketing channels. And of course you need to do that. And, you can be up on Times Square, et cetera. I mean, all of these things are great, but they're also very, very expensive. And then, you go back to all of your, CAC numbers and your LTV to CAC and your revenue per employee. And, you start digging down on those KPIs.
Are those, just a thought perhaps connected to that, You know, when you see on LinkedIn that the people, they're standing in Times Square and they're on the billboards and and so on. Are these photoshopped, or is this actually happening? That they just paid for a slot and they've flown out there to stand, in front of Times Square, and then what is the value, of that apart from a few likes?
It's a good power moment as far as marketing and branding is concerned. A lot of it's paid for. If it's not by them directly, then it's by a partner, or a particular agency, and a campaign can get them up there. And Alex, I know I do see a lot in LinkedIn. For some reason in the past 6 months, there's been a lot of this Times Square advertising. So whoever owns that space, I think, is making a pretty penny. But to me, it seems a little bit more of a clickbait. Because if people really knew about your story and your mission and your vision, what you're trying to say, then your story would be everywhere. To me, it says a lot more about your storytelling and your branding and your marketing if I literally see you everywhere and it's being reshared everywhere and it is the buzz of the town versus you see it one time on, Times Square in New York City. So I think all of us would love to be up there at some stage for something, but I think it's more important, how you got there and that journey.
Another thing we also see, but I'm sure not every company does this, right? But those that do it seem to do it well, in their kind of scaling up phase. Whether it's their CEO, often, quite the case, but they write a book, right, and publish it on Wiley, and like Gainsight wrote a book, customer success, obviously, right, and they want to become known as that, the expert, and kind of like own that domain. Again, is this something that maybe does every company have a book in them, and become the experts in their domain, and then is Wiley also then going to make a pretty penny, or however it works, from that perspective? But like, what are your thoughts around that? Is it again something companies should really consider, or is it just not for everybody? But perhaps if you're the category leader or so on, that it's something that you should almost certainly do.
If you're the category leader, or if you have something valuable to add to the conversation, then absolutely, why not share the knowledge? There are tons of different platforms that are making money off this. Good for them. But I would say these platforms will change over time. So I think I actually saw on LinkedIn that, there was a post about 10 years ago where people were laughing that they were posting on LinkedIn. Now it's the thing of the day. In another 5 to 10 years, maybe it'll be something else. So these mediums and channels will change, but it's the knowledge. That's the piece. Share it. If you have something groundbreaking to say, something that can change the industry, you found the secret sauce, to go to market or revenue, please share it, with the community. And I think, let's help one another. But I think your question goes more to, as a founder, is there a formula? Do I get my face up there in Times Square and I write a book and I do something else, and this is the formula, to success? And I wouldn't say necessarily so. So there's been plenty of founders who have been successful and have never done, hardly any of that. So I would just say, again, there are tons of books out there. Sometimes when people ask me for my favorite business book, my favorite business book is actually The Alchemist, which is not necessarily a business book at all. It's more about, self-discovery and self-learning, because I believe that's the foundation of growth, and, what every leader needs to have. Alex, you said it yourself, you interview so many founders and so many, category leaders. If every single person wrote a book, we would just be reading, forever and nonstop. I would just say, make sure that it really adds, some value, and maybe calls out some uncomfortable truths and has some authenticity in there.
Great point. And also interesting, you're the second person after however many hundreds of episodes that have mentioned Alchemist as their favorite business book. So I feel like maybe after 20 years, it's time for me to reread that and, find out why that is, because it certainly, I think it was when I was backpacking around Thailand that I naturally probably read that, so a long time ago. And actually, a question, but not about branding, but it's sort of marketing. So something I've seen, a real commonality this year, and let's say specifically with early stage SaaS companies, maybe even up to 5 million sort of ARR, the companies that have also been around, 10 years, but they're at 5 million ARR, was that a lot of founders are saying they just really having a hard time finding a good head of marketing. They're not getting it right. They're getting it wrong. And they're seeing this is obviously just causing a lot of problems with the business. They're like, how do you hire a good head of marketing? And is that going to be the panacea to all the marketing problems?
It's a really great question because I get asked the same. I do a lot of advising, and there's a lot of different organizations out there. And I think the first thing, if you're a founder listening to this episode, a lot of founders don't actually understand what marketing is. And it's just, a foundational truth. And a lot of them might say, oh, okay, I've seen an ad before, or I've seen a press release go out, I kind of get it. No, they don't. It's like saying, I want an engineer. I'm like, well, there's a software engineer, an electrical engineer, structural engineer. I mean, which one are you looking for? And it's the same thing as far as marketing. You have performance marketers and content marketers and brand marketers. You have channel marketers, partner marketers, etc. So really identifying what your go-to-market strategy is, identifying who your ICP is, and these are just the fundamentals, and then what resonates to your ICP. And you have to identify that first and then back into the type of marketing that you want or need that will resonate. And this is where a lot of early stage founders get it wrong. Or there's a second case where especially their investors, because a lot of early stage founders will rely on, the investor advice in that community. And they'll say, look, in the age of data-driven marketing, you spend €1, you get 10. And they're making up this, very, I would say, large ROI calculation. And then all that does at the early stages, of a founder's scaling journey is it forces them into a demand gen performance marketing motion. And then that means that they're going after performance marketers, and then they just keep asking for more budget and more budget. And then they go through what I call the roller coaster graph of spending a lot of money, figuring out you don't have your ICP right, and then you slash all the budgets in the teams and you do all of that. So this is the reason why a lot of founders say that it's difficult to hire a head of marketing. It's not actually. You have to identify who your client is, what your client resonates, where your client is at. So, which channels are they super, super old school and you have to go to industry magazines? Do they like PR? Okay. Are they all in LinkedIn? We hope. It'll be easier to get them. But either way, just identifying what that is and then backing into the type of skill set that you need.
Awesome. And we want to go then fast forward to 3 weeks' time, you being back in Dublin, speaking at SaaStock. Tell us a little bit about what you'll be speaking about, maybe a couple of insights without giving anything away, because obviously we want people to be there to watch your talk.
Sure. So one of my favorite, most passionate topics about brand, but also using it as a revenue driver. So, the first and foremost, tidbit is number one, starting brand as a revenue driver up front. And what does that mean? So during SaaStock, I'll be breaking it out and unpacking that, what that means, how you as an early stage founder can basically set up that foundation for revenue growth through brand. The second step is, what are the pitfalls that you go through? So like we just talked about with the roller coaster graph, how do you avoid such a graph? You can save a lot of time and money. And then the third piece is the storytelling piece. How do you effectively tell your story? And this is something that even in today's podcast, a lot of founders are struggling with. Do they feel confident telling their stories? What are the best stories, the type of stories to tell? And how can you be most authentic? And I think if you can get these three major points down, you're well on your way to sustainable and predictable revenue growth, which is what every founder is looking for at this stage.
And I'm looking forward to the talk. And when you spoke for the first time, I think last year at SaaStock Europe, outside of the speaking engagement, perhaps it was there one memorable sort of moments or something that you sort of really enjoyed or got value from your couple of days there?
I had a podcast. So last year at SaaStock, you guys had an amazing podcast stage. in the middle of the conference, and everybody was wearing their headphones. And I had an amazing podcast, all about women in tech leadership, which is something that I think needs to be highlighted a little bit more, about the challenges we're facing, about some of the cool success stories that we're having, and what is it really like? I also hear a lot of founders these days saying they can't find female talent, or it just doesn't exist, which is completely not true. So I really appreciate SaaStock for, bringing out some of these really key topics. And it was a great podcast. And I actually heard a lot of the men, were there as well, really identifying with everything. So that was actually one of my most favorite moments. It was raw, it was authentic, it was thought-provoking.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. I know last year we had a great Women in SaaS event within SaaStock. This year we've adapted, and I think there's a program running which is called Fierce, which again I think is largely aimed for women in SaaS. So a number of events within the event. So we're very much inclusive towards that, and hopefully we're getting many current female founders and future founders and operators that will be joining us there for sure. But very much looking forward to seeing you again in Dublin. Really appreciate you taking the time out before then, sharing these insights all around brand, founder brand, company brand, and looking forward to your talk and seeing you at SaaStock Europe 14th to the 16th of October. Thanks very much, Angeley Mullins.
Thank you.